and live on Facebook. Cool. I am Olajide of MakeCinematicMusic.com, and today we're going to be talking about what DAW to use for composers. Now, this is specifically if you are a composer for films or video games. Before I get started, please do grab my free composer gear guide, which you can grab at MakeCinematicMusic.com. There's lots of great recommendations on everything from things like DAWs and software to other gear like sample libraries and headphones and all that good stuff, specifically for composers. Okay, let's get into things. So, I'm going to go over the 5 best DAWs for film and game composers, starting with Logic Pro. Now, Logic Pro was my first DAW alongside Pro Tools. I learned them simultaneously. Um, the good thing about Logic Pro is that it's cheap. It's about $200, and that $200 creates a lot of value when you consider the fact that you get free updates to Logic Pro for the life of the product. So if you bought Logic Pro 10, which was released, I think, in 2015 or 2012, I don't remember, every iteration of Logic Pro since then has been completely free of charge. So that's a really great value. The other thing that's really great about Logic Pro is that it is very common. Just about every musician that I work with that is sending me files that's recording themselves at home uses Logic Pro without exception. And I record all around the world. Among composers, there's a little bit more diversity, but the nice thing is that if you're going to be flying musicians in for sessions, meaning having musicians record material and send it to you, the odds are that they are going to have Logic Pro. And even if they don't, it's pretty easy to get things into there. The next reason that Logic Pro is really great is because of the amazing plugins and effects. Logic Pro, hands down, has the greatest number of high quality effects for mixing, for sound design, and for virtual instruments in terms of software synths and virtual instruments and world instruments and drum kits and everything. Of course, all of the DAWs that I'm going to mention today have some amount of plugins, but it's really, really not close. Obviously, you can make up for that with purchasing third-party plugins and things like that, which you should do. But if you're just getting started, and if you're on a Mac, Logic Pro is a great deal. That being said, Logic Pro is Mac only. So if you have a PC, obviously you can't use it. And if you're thinking about getting a PC, or if you work between PC and Mac like I do, then Logic probably isn't the right choice for you. There are some other ones that I'll talk about that are going to be better for that. The last thing that's really great about Logic Pro is that it has lots of really specialized tools for working to picture. The video track and the ability to sync with video and work with video and time code in Logic Pro is really advanced, and that's the last reason why it's really great for composers, specifically if you're going to be working with film. Now, the next DAW that I highly recommend if you are a film or game composer is Cubase by Steinberg. Cubase is great because it's highly customizable. It's probably the Formula One car of DAWs. Lots of advanced functionality with regards to macros and being able to perform advanced MIDI operations to transform MIDI and all that good stuff, and key commands and all that. It's designed with a very fast workflow in mind. So what I like to say is that Cubase is the DAW to use if you like to work fast. Obviously, you need to take the time to set it up properly so that you can be efficient in it and learn the lay of the land, but it's absolutely optimized for speed in terms of people that need to get a lot of work done in a short period of time. Cubase does feature annual updates. So every year, Steinberg releases a 0.5 update that you can pretty much count on like clockwork. That's being slightly broken this year because they're moving away from hardware authorization to a software-based authorization, which has pushed back the update. But other than this year, every year you can expect a zero point 0.5 update, meaning you're going to be getting a new software version every year. That being said, the software updates are paid. So unlike Logic Pro, where you pay $200 once and you get software updates until the end of time, presumably, with Cubase, you do have to pay for them. Um, Cubase is the first DAW that we'll talk about today that is Mac and PC compatible. In fact, from Cubase onwards, all of the DAWs that I'm going to talk about are Mac and PC compatible, which is really great if you're working on both or you don't know what you're going to be working on. I use my MacBook Pro when I travel and I have a PC at home, so it's really useful for me. And the price point for Cubase is $600. So Cubase Pro, $600. The next DAW that I highly recommend for film and game composers is Studio One. So Studio One is probably, yeah, it's the newest of all of the DAWs on this list. It features flexible and advanced tools for music production and composition. It has a modern design because it's, 10 years old or less. It works on Mac and PC and there's a few different pricing options. It's either $400 outright, $165 a year, or $15 a month with the what's it called? The PreSonus Sphere, I think it's called, that you can subscribe to. The only drawback of Studio One, if there is any, is that there's still no great workflow for working with picture. You can import video files and you can score to picture, but it doesn't have the robust tool set that Logic Pro or Cubase or Digital Performer, which I'm going to mention next, has for working with video. But if you're more of a video game composer, there's really no reason not to go with Studio One, because one of the great things that it does is it does borrow a lot of technologies and workflows from programs like that have been around for a long time, like Cubase and Logic. Next up is Digital Performer, which I have to say, while worth considering if you're going to be serious about film and game music, is not one that I personally recommend, but I'll still go over it. Digital Performer does feature advanced MIDI editing. It has one of the most, if not the most specialized tool set in a DAW specifically for picture, in chunks, which allow you to arrange your sequences into smaller kind of modules. It's got a very flexible metronome, which people rave about. You can set your accents and your subdivisions very, very accurately. Although Cubase has added that functionality recently, that's a nice thing to have. And then lastly, it has this feature called punches and streamers, which are basically visual cues that you can use when working to picture. And I believe you can print them onto the picture as well when you export them. Digital Performer is Mac and PC compatible, and it goes for around $500. Now, the reasons I don't recommend Digital Performer is that it's such an old program, which isn't a bad thing. Both Logic and Cubase are also quite old, but over 30 years old. It's not a program that there's a lot of new users for. The majority of Digital Performer users are people who have been working in film and or television since the 1980s or 90s, which is not a bad thing, but it's a little bit long in the tooth. Although they do add to it every other year or so, it does have some pretty outmoded workflow paradigms. I remember doing research for a course that I was creating for MacProVideo.com and discovering the workflow for exporting stems and a couple of other things, and I just thought that wasn't something that I would be willing to deal with and that I would recommend anybody going through. But it is there, and if, in particular, if you're wanting to work for a composer that uses Digital Performer and you happen to know that that's their main tool, then by all means, check it out. Now, the last DAW that we'll talk about might be a little bit unexpected, but it's Pro Tools. Now, Pro Tools can be great either as a companion to any of these other DAWs that I mentioned or on its own. But the benefits of Pro Tools are that it's excellent audio capabilities in terms of editing, mixing, preparation, all that. Good video tools, meaning you can import video files and you can score to them. And I think in the ultimate version of Pro Tools, you can even have multiple video tracks, which is cool. it's industry standard, and it's the only one among any of these tools that can be considered industry standard. What that means is that every single post house in the world worth their salt that's doing anything for broadcast or any type of feature films is ultimately going to be doing their final mixes in Pro Tools without exception. So what that means is that if you're particularly going to be getting into TV, this is probably the workflow for which it makes the most sense. If you're going to be scoring for TV, some TV composers will choose to go directly into Pro Tools because they can just deliver their Pro Tools sessions directly to the dubbing stage, and the dubbing engineer can integrate their session alongside all of the effects and the Foley and the dialogue and all that. So it can be really great if you're going to be doing a lot of TV composing. A couple of drawbacks of Pro Tools, though, is that it has less advanced MIDI editing capabilities compared to something like Logic Pro or certainly Cubase or Digital Performer in terms of what you can access via key commands and the ways with which, or the tool set with which you can manipulate MIDI. So that's a consideration. So it might be better if you have really great keyboard chops, or if you are not having to quantize, or if you're doing a lot of scoring with audio, just plain instruments in. The last thing that I think is kind of a knock on Pro Tools is that it's not really ideal for large templates, even if you have a really powerful computer. Pro Tools was never really optimized to deal with, tens of gigabytes worth of virtual instruments. So if you're somebody like me who's working with hundreds of virtual instruments in a single session, you have a system with 128 gigabytes of memory or more. Not ideal. Of course, you could use something like Vienna Ensemble Pro to manage the memory for you instead, but the workflow paradigms of Pro Tools are not specifically designed, they're not optimized to work the best with those types of workflows. In terms of pricing, you're looking at anywhere between $600 for the standard Pro Tools for a perpetual license to $2,500 for the, what's it called these days, Pro Tools Ultimate. It used to be called Pro Tools HD, which gives you more track counts and some more advanced functionality that's specifically related to post-production. Or you can get a rental of the standard version of Pro Tools for around $30 or €30 per month. So that was a mouthful, but that's an overview of what I consider to be the top 5 DAWs for film and game composers. If you'd like a deeper dive into gear that I recommend for film and game composers, please pick up my free guide at makecinematicmusic.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.